Are the stories about New York City true? Is crime really running rampant? We had some stabbings in the subways. We've heard about that, et cetera, et cetera. And is it a ghost town? Are people just leaving? And you look at some of the traffic shots. Doesn't seem to be much going up 6th Avenue or wherever it is. Let's talk about this with Steve Kastenbaum, who's a veteran New York journalist and host of the new podcast, New York Gritty. You can follow him on Twitter at @Kastenbaum and listen to the New York Gritty podcast on the iHeart Radio app or at nygritty.com. Good morning to you, Steve. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Well, tell us. I mean, I used to live in the city. I live downtown predominantly, and great memories of it. I still miss it to this day, but it sounds like it's really taken a great turn for the worse during this pandemic. What's happening?
Yeah, I don't think anybody would deny the fact that New York City has been changed and changed in ways that may actually be permanent. I mean, as you mentioned, Midtown Manhattan, the commuters have not come back. We're coming up on a year now in March on the start of the shutdown here. Certain restrictions were lifted a long time ago, but we still don't see the return of Broadway. Just this past month, the Hospitality Alliance here in New York reported that 92% of restaurant owners were not able to pay all or some of their rent. So, yeah, there's a lot of struggling going on here. But at the same time that there is, a loss of that economic activity in Midtown, in other parts of the city, throughout the rest of the city, what we've been seeing as we've been interviewing folks for New York Gritty is that there is a resilience, there's a perseverance, and there are a lot of people in different economic sectors of this city are finding ways to survive, and they still have hope. They're still optimistic about the future of this city because they say it always bounces back from hardship. It's done so before, and they say it'll do it again.
Right. What about retail? I mean, I used to live down in Soho, so, that West Broadway area with some really nice retail, higher end stuff that came in. Are those empty storefronts now or what?
So there certainly are more empty storefronts today than there were before the pandemic, but we have seen here in New York a pretty significant bounce back in street-level retail shopping. It's not quite back to where it was before the pandemic, and it's not clear when it'll get back to those levels, especially considering that tourism is down to still near zero levels when annually we would have 61 million people coming to New York City. And they're a big part of this economy. So it'll take a while to get back there. Nonetheless, in many of the different neighborhoods, especially the residential neighborhoods of the city that aren't dependent on the tourist economy, we've seen retail come back close up to where it was prior to the pandemic. So there has been a bounce back there.
All right. Good news there. Florida, we've been open for a long time. Restaurants, retail, hotels, you name it, we're open. We're open for business. And a lot of people wanted to compare New York to Florida. They always do because we have a very close relationship between the two states. A lot of people spend half time there, half time here. The trouble with Mario Cuomo, with Bill de Blasio, are people mad in New York City and around the state? Are they upset with that leadership?
I think so, for sure. I think that, early on in the pandemic, it was pretty clear, and a lot has been written about this, that the way that the governor and the mayor were butting heads and going back and forth on this and what restrictions they were imposing, who was in charge, who could pull the trigger on whether things closed. That certainly made matters worse here in New York. And I think that, we have a mayoral election coming up here in New York, as many Floridians are aware. There's over a dozen candidates running for mayor in New York, and there's tremendous interest in that primary for the Democratic Party. So I think people are ready for change here in leadership in New York City, for sure.
It sounds that way. What about crime? How is that playing out on the streets?
And it's really interesting in what's been going on because we've seemed to have come full circle in New York from the Black Lives Matter protests back in June, where the defund the police or, reform the police department cry was very much a part of the policy here in New York, and now they're taking on a new class of recruits for the police department. So it seems to have come full circle. So many police officers retired, they needed to be replaced, quite frankly. So they are bringing in new police officers into the department now. There has been a slight increase in some crimes, but in others there's been a decrease. It really it's a very nuanced thing to look at right now. It's not something that's blanket across the board. There have certainly been some high-profile incidents that have garnered a lot of attention. Some incidents in the subway, for instance, but overall that rise in crime has not been significant. When you look back over the arc of crime rates in New York City, it's still significantly lower than it ever was during its highest points, in the 80s and the 90s, and even much, much lower than it was at the beginning of this century. So, yes, crime has gone up, but it's still one of the safest cities in the United States of this size.
All right. The name of the podcast is New York Gritty. Find it at newyorkgritty.com or at the iHeart Radio app. His name is Steve Kastenbaum. Steve, good luck to you. Thanks so much for your time this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it.